It's fast, fairly unassuming, and becoming increasingly difficult to find. If you happen to live in the United States, this is the Pontiac GTO. If you happen to live in Australia, it's the Holden Monaro. Welcome back, guys. Or if you're new to my channel, this is Automotive Anonymous, and that's the Pontiac GTO. And it's actually in a color that Pontiac likes to call Barbados Blue Metallic. And although this is one of the best looking GTOs that I have ever seen, it's not perfect. So today I gotta share the good, the bad, and the ugly of this iconic muscle car to help you decide if potentially one of the most modern ones might be worth your time and money. So today we get to do a walk around, go through the specs, initial driving impressions, 0 to 60 on GPS, and then my final thoughts to help you decide what do you do with the Pontiac GTO. And huge thanks to the Goody Motor Group for letting me borrow theirs. I'm going to link this one below if you're interested. Otherwise, let's dive right in with this review. But if you're new to the Pontiac GTO, you really should know that the nameplate GTO wasn't actually original to Pontiac. They actually copied it. Those engineers really liked the name of the Ferrari 250 GTO, what that vehicle was, what it symbolized, and hence you get GTO on this. But GTO also wasn't even its own model. It was a trim level when these first came out. Back in 1964, there were a lot of regulations, and Pontiac and GM decided that they weren't going to participate with racing. But that doesn't mean that some of those red-blooded Americans didn't like racing and big engines. So they literally hammered the biggest engine they could find into a Pontiac Le Mans. And there you have it, the big engine, small vehicle designed out for quite a while be the muscle car formula. Although the GTO wasn't actually the first muscle car, there were SS division vehicles before that. It's one of the first, and it's one of the forerunners, and there's a reason why a lot of people know its name. But let's fast forward a little bit. This was around for about 10 years, from 64 to 74. In that time, there were technically 4 generations of it, between being a trim level to its own model. And then there was a 30-year hiatus before this bad boy showed up on American shores, and the next generation of GTO came out. And that's what we're here today to talk about. Now, not to make things more confusing than they already are, but this modern or most modern GTO is now 20 years old, and it's not even an American car. This is just a rebadged Holden Monaro, which is Australians' GM division, basically their version of Pontiac. They were the cool guys making a lot of cool cars like this and other big V8 rear-wheel drive vehicles back in the day. Unfortunately, just like Pontiac, GM shut them down when they closed their doors at the end of 2020, but the Monaro also shut down back in 2006, just like our American one. So these were shipped from Southern Australia, where they were made in Elizabeth, and we only got about 11 to 15,000 of them a year, so you really don't see them that often, which is why they don't really stand out, in addition to their styling characteristics, which also don't really stand out. This is kind of like the big bloated rear-wheel drive version of the Chevy Cobalt Coupe, if we're being honest. Another reason why I don't think these exactly sold very well is they weren't exactly, how do you say it, they weren't cheap. Pontiac wasn't just giving these away. Back in 04, when this one came out, it was $32,000 MSRP, and that's for the base model before options. So in today's money with inflation, that's $52,000. Basically the same or even more than a loaded out 2SS Camaro, or even a Performance Pack Mustang GT. So they were fairly pricey for back then, and they weren't very well known. They weren't very, common for what Pontiac was trying to do when they rebadged the Monaro. But these, I think, set the way for the Pontiac G8 to come from Australia as well. The Holden Commodore, that's basically the 4-door sedan version of this. And then later, before, Holden shut down, we still got a few more cool vehicles basically from them, such as the PPV Caprice, which unfortunately was only a police special. It was basically a G8 GT that was a short wheelbase. Or even the Chevy SS from 2014 to 2017. So the GTO from Australia paved the way for a couple other really cool rear-wheel drive big V8 performance cars to come to America. Personally, I really like the front end of these, especially when you know what you're looking at. This 04 obviously does have an aftermarket hood, and it has full bolt-ons and a tune, so it is a little bit peppier than a base 04. It's closer to probably like an 05, 06 LS2. But this engine, it came from the C5 Corvette from just a few years ago. It was also the one that was put into the Trans Am and the Camaro from the 4th generation. And I used to have an LS1, so there's a little bit of sentimental value to this one. But anyways, these are about 16 feet long, roughly 6 feet wide, and about 5 feet tall. The wheelbase is about 9 feet, so it's actually pretty planted on the road. And then it weighs a pretty massive 3,800 pounds, which it is 55% on the front wheels, 45 on the back, and you can tell at low speeds especially the steering's a little bit heavy, and it is kind of, you know, heavy on the front, unlike more modern performance cars that are more like 50-50. But the payload capacity is 740 pounds, so you can hold 740 pounds worth of your favorite people and stuff in your GTO. It has about 4.5 inches of ground clearance, reasonably aggressive but also fairly economical 346 final drive ratio, and it can do a full circle in about 36 feet when you keep the rear from sliding. The last few things to mention out here, but I want to mention that I apologize for the crazy wind we're having today. The trees are so happy to be near the GTO that they're just dancing uncontrollably. But the gas door, it's located right there on the passenger side. It's locking, so the bums can't steal any of your 18 gallons of fuel. There is a switch on the inside to unlock it, but this, depending on the transmission, if it's the 6-speed T56 manual or the 4L60 like this one has, you can get up to about 27 highway, about 19 in the city, so your max road tripping range is close to 500. And then the wheels, they're a 245 4017, and they look really good. It actually looks like these ones have been painted versus a little bit brighter silver color on the factory GTOs. And then if you've noticed, or haven't noticed, I'll show you, there's drilled and slotted aftermarket rotors front and rear, which is pretty cool. But otherwise, this is your key. The GTO has an actual key, but it has lock and panic button. So leave that in your pocket unless you're using it to open up the vehicle with the keyhole. But opening up the GTO's door, it's actually huge. It's humongous. Just look at that. It takes up a lot of the length of the vehicle, which is pretty common on coupes, especially coupes of this era. My Trans Am was exactly the same way. But the door panel, it's all black materials. It's held up well. There's no cracking. There's no rotting. Nothing like that. Even the armrest, you know, it's fairly wide for a performance car, and it's fairly comfortable. You can have a nice meaty handle and a little bit of storage down here. Even have a light when the door's open so no one hits you, or maybe to light your path. Whatever way it works for me. Anyways, you have Pontiac right there on the door sill. You have kind of a hybrid rubberized and cloth mat. Aluminum pedals. You have the hood release, the OBD2 ports down there. No knee bags or anything, but it actually does have kind of like an Alcantara right there, which is really a nice surprise. There's the gas door. There's your lighting. There's more cruise control settings right there. And the leather seat looks really nice. It is powered, not heated on this one, but you do have some pretty good bolstering on this GTO. Sitting inside here, it's actually a pretty nice place to be. I've spent quite a bit of time driving this around already. Visibility's good. The armrest comfort actually works really well for me at 5'11". Basically has what looks like a truck steering wheel with a different, you know, airbag and badging right there. But it's nice. Everything's where you want it to be. But you do have to turn the key, so if you're not used to 20-year-old cars, pull that key out of your pocket, fire it right up, and take a listen. Fires right up and it roars to life, giving you a little bit of gas. Really sounds good with the catback and the headers that this has. The horn sounds pretty average, probably just from the parts bin. And this one has only 85,000 miles. So what were the previous owner or owners doing not driving their GTO? Anyways, you have a few of your options right here. There really aren't a whole lot of controls that this has besides just the basic, you know, ventilation up top, radio down below, some storage. This is before the era of USBs and 9 volts everywhere. Maybe not the 9 volts, but the USBs. You can go down through your gears. Here's your reverse camera. Otherwise, you can even go down to 1, 2, and 3, which are the normal gears. 4th gear is kind of like the overdrive on these. You have your window controls. You can see they're tinted darkly, but they're fast. Sometimes old Pontiacs and old GMs have window motors that go out. You have some accessories from the previous owner that almost looks like a nitrous activation and on purge switch. Who knows though? And then you have, you know, a center console with CD trays, a slot, and some coin holders with an old incandescent light. Otherwise, there's nothing up top. There's no auto-dimming mirrors, compass, none of that modern tech nonsense that you don't need on your muscle car. And then some very unbright, old incandescents right there. But it is really nice. It doesn't slide or anything, but it does come off and swivel. Anyways, guys, let's turn it off and let's move on. I'll be honest, guys, I wasn't quite sure if I was gonna hop in the back today, if I felt up to the challenge, but here we go. I'm gonna show you guys this in real time. Ooh, it's tight. Actually, that was really rough getting in here. But now that I'm in here, I have an armrest. I have pretty good visibility. I know I have a way out, so I, will try not to be too claustrophobic. But it's actually been a couple years since I've driven a GTO, and I've only driven the 05 and 06 models before. So I did not realize how spacious the back seats were. I also don't know if I've been in one of these before, but that was a really nice surprise. This 20-year-old GTO has way more back seat room than the modern Mustang and Camaros. So that's quite interesting. A little bit of a storage spot down there and some old vents that could use a little bit of a vacuum. But anyways, let's hop out and we'll move on to the cargo area. While the back of the GTO is what a lot of people are going to see, especially at the drag strip, and especially back in 04 when this really made a lot of power compared to the competition, it's quite unassuming. So although people are going to be beaten by something that says GTO 5.7, they're really not going to know what this is. Even only having the single outlet for the exhaust, which on this, the aftermarket catback is a dual exhaust on that side, people, might just not know what they're looking at, especially if you debadge it. Kind of interesting. But I actually need to correct a wrong. I said that this was the panic button. This is actually the trunk popper. So let me show you the 9 cubic feet of room that you have in the trunk of the Pontiac GTO, which is actually kind of unusually spaced. So although this has a bigger back seat than I realized just now, you can see that that makes up for it in kind of the wonkiness of the trunk. So you could fit some golf clubs back here, which isn't that ultimately the only thing that matters to a lot of people, but you're not going to be able to fit a lot of other stuff. And there should be a small donut spare tire. Yep. And that looks like an aftermarket wheel on that one. So pretty neat. You have a scissor jack down there as well. Otherwise, let's drop it and let's move on to the passenger side. The passenger side door panel actually follows basically the same theme and design language. And you even have ventilation on it, which is really cool. Doesn't look like it's been that worn, that used, and you still have the lighting down there. You still have the Pontiac emblem on the door sill. Power seats even. The backpack's having a good time. It's being held in fairly well with that bolstering on the side. Nothing on the transmission tunnel. Unfortunately, the e-brake is on the passenger side rather than the driver's side, but they can't fit everything on the driver's side. And then you have a locking glove box with an incandescent light, and it's actually pretty big. It goes far back for what I was expecting. And you even have a front airbag for the GTO passenger. More ventilation. You can kind of see how it goes through the door and then out to the, to the rider, the shotgun seat holder. But anyways, guys, let's come around to the front. I'm going to pop the hood and show you what the LS1 with its bolt-ons look like. Under the hood, the GTO looks really good, and if you know what you're looking at, you can tell right away that that's an LS engine with the LS1. I do like that you have the GTO covers over the valve covers, kind of like the Corvettes have, and they are, not just LS1, but they're actually GTO stamped, which is cool. But this is a really clean engine bay, and as you can tell, it fits a lot of the space under the hood is for that engine, which is really nice. And it even looks a lot more open and clean than what this would have looked like from the factory. So I'll try to overlay a picture here. But you have a K&N intake, you have exhaust headers, and you have aftermarket spark plugs, MSD brand. So whoever did their work, it seems like they're using good parts. You have the battery, your fuses, your, cruise control box right there. Oil dipstick, oil fill, all of your reservoirs up top. So there's not likely to be a lot of maintenance on this vehicle with how basic and simple this pushrod V8 is. But bone stock, it makes about 350 horse at 6,000 RPM and about 365 foot-pound-feet of torque at about 4,000 RPM. So it's a proven platform, and even 20 years old, it feels great, it sounds great, and we're going to have a lot of fun on the road. So with that said, let's drop the hood. Initial driving impressions in the GTO. Yep, it pulls and it feels like an LS engine. But more than that, this actually has pretty good visibility. The A pillar, the B pillar, they're not overly wide. The C in the back is pretty wide, but you can still see out of this fairly well for it being a little two-door coupe. But when you're driving it, it actually doesn't feel that little. 3,800 pounds, you're gonna feel it when you're tossing this thing around. And even doing a little bit of a U-turn right here, taking just under 40 feet. Actually, that wasn't too bad, getting right back up to speed. Half throttle. And, it's a pushrod V8, so it revs to about 6,000 RPM. But when you're up to speed, the steering has a little bit of slack before anything really happens on the road. The bolstering actually feels pretty good. I don't think it feels as aggressive as it looks. Maybe if I was a little bit wider, but at 5'11", me and my backpack were held in fairly well, better than the average car, but not as good as like a dedicated car or a race seat, of course. There's a tractor. Probably has less horsepower than us. I'd imagine with the headers, the intake, the tune, and if I'm not sensing that there's any internal work to this engine, so it's maybe 400 at the crank, horse and torque, maybe low 3s at the wheel. It feels really good. You can see the huge bulge. There it is. Look at that giant bulge. Makes you feel like you're driving something special, because out back, or when you look behind yourself, you almost might think that you're just sitting in like a 2-door coupe Chevy Cobalt or an Ion Redline. I think that's what those are. But then you notice the paint color, the rear fender quarter panel that disappears, and you notice Pontiac on the steering wheel. So even though this is basically like a truck steering wheel, if Pontiac made such a thing with the 6 o'clock handle and kind of just the big layout, the big huge, you know, airbag area, not too bad. Otherwise, sitting inside here, I have some cup holders, I have my window switches. I always thought it was interesting how Pontiac put those there rather than having them on the door panel. But whatever, you know, interesting features they wanted to add, I'm willing to accept, because Pontiacs are cool. Not only was it the performance division, but it was kind of the quirky division too from General Motors. You can see GTO on the dashboard. And this dash has actually held up really well, because one of the problems with the earlier year to this Camaros and Trans Am is these dashboards would crack. So if you buy one of those, maybe check out the forums, notice if that's a problem, and if it is, just buy, you know, a reflector. But otherwise, let's do one more rolling acceleration and then we'll get to the private road for a 0 to 60. That sounds glorious. All right, 0 to 60 time. 0 to 60 in the GTO. Traction's off. I'll do a light brake rev while trying to not let it overly spin, and we'll see what it can do. Keep in mind though, density altitude's 5,600 feet, so this naturally aspirated engine is down in power about 20%. And true 0 to 60 came in at 6.54, which is pretty average. I actually did a run before this and it was about the same. Which, with this being down on power 20% and not on a private sticky track, honestly, what do you expect? Let's get to my final thoughts. My final thoughts of the Pontiac GTO, specifically this one. It's 20 years old. It's only the LS1. Only the LS1. Yet it still feels extremely solid. It feels very relevant to today's performance standards. Sure, it's not the fastest thing on the road, but is it one of the funnest? Does it have a lot of driver input and sensation and have a little bit of the rawness that's disappeared from a lot of the modern stuff? Yeah, this is one of those cars that it feels like you're going as fast as you are compared to a lot of new vehicles, or the extreme is like when I drove the Tesla Plaid, where you can't feel how fast you're really going because it's so numb. It's so, you know, so stable. This, while being stable, while feeling very well maintained, it gives you a lot of the sensation that you want in a muscle car. You rev the engine, the vehicle shakes a little bit. It feels good, it sounds good, and you feel like you're really driving something special. And when you put your foot down on the gas pedal, you know, you're in for a little bit of a surprise. Auditorily, performance-wise, there's a lot of aspects, there's a lot of benefits to having something like this. It even can fit full-size adults in the back seat. But, you know, the question of, is it worth it? That's up to you, in my opinion. If you can find a really clean one of these for, you know, as far under 20 grand as you can, sure, I think it's worth it, especially if it was something like this, a very clean example that potentially was a one-owner car, probably garage kept, because otherwise I don't know how 20-year-old paint looks this good. But anyways, guys, that's just my thoughts and opinions. What are yours? Those of you who have owned an original 64 to 74 GTO, or one of the 04 to 06 modern ones, which is more in my timeline, let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Like this video if it was helpful to you in any way. Remember, this one is linked below in the description if you specifically want it. It's at the Goody Motor Group in Southern Idaho. Really good group to work with. And until next time, guys, I wish you the best. Again, I apologize for the dancing trees. And I can't wait to see you on the next one. Take care.